Mark, have the floor.
Great, thank you. Again, my name is Mark Bromley. I'm with the Council for Global Equality, which is based here in Washington. We are an advocacy organization that is made up of 14 other organizations. So we are a coalition of organizations that focus specifically on lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender concerns, as well as many of the large international human rights organizations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, many of the large ones that you're familiar with. And together we come together to set an agenda to encourage discussion of violence and discrimination against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender communities as serious human rights concerns, and to use a human rights agenda to address those issues. So, first of all, thank you all for being here and for hanging on so late on a Friday afternoon. I really appreciate it. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the landscape across the Americas. Obviously, it's a diverse region, but what are some of the overriding realities that lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender communities face? And then talk a little bit about one of the unfortunate manifestations of intolerance toward LGBT communities, which is a significant manifestation of hate crime violence across the Americas, of violence directed at individuals specifically because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And then talk a little bit about some of the tolerance programs that we've seen both in the Americas and some other regions of the world that are trying to address that intolerance and that excessive level of violence through social dialogue and education, and see what we can extrapolate from some of those programs. So across the Americas, there are NGOs, there are advocacy organizations working on lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender issues in every country across the Americas. They're often under-resourced, often under threat, not always fully recognized, but they're there and they are fighting for equality and recognition. There are many human rights defenders across the Americas working on these issues, but unfortunately many of those defenders are themselves exposed to extreme violence, often violence that is sexualized to discourage them from speaking out, or to punish them for what is considered to be a transgression of gender stereotypes. So much of the violence is actually quite sexualized in terms of sexual violence or rape. Nonetheless, I think we have to recognize that there's been a remarkable period of law reform across the Americas, where we've seen the repeal in Latin America and North America. We've seen the repeal of sodomy laws, of laws that criminalize consensual homosexual conduct between adults. We've seen the repeal of sodomy laws across Latin America and North America. Panama and Nicaragua last year repealed their sodomy laws, fortunately. Unfortunately, in the Caribbean, we still see that 13 of 15 CARICOM states continue to criminalize consensual conduct. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But there has been this remarkable period of legal reform. We see that 7 countries across the Americas have national non-discrimination laws that protect individuals regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Many, many more countries have laws at the local, state, or federal level that offer protections. Ecuador has enshrined protection in its constitution. Many other countries, including the United States, have read protections into the Constitution through jurisprudence. So we have seen real progress on the legal front, and I think we're just at the very beginning of that progress. We're obviously in the middle of difficult legal discussions about fuller recognition of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender families, relationships, children. So we're at the beginning, I think, of legal reform, but it is quite important to see where we've come. Nonetheless, in the midst of that legal reform, I think we have to recognize that those legal changes have not yet translated into full equality for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender individuals. That legal reform is not trickling down fully to protect those communities. And indeed, quite the contrary. We're seeing an increase in hate crime violence. We're seeing an increase in extreme violence against LGBT communities across the Americas. As you may know, the UN General Assembly for the past 2 years has adopted a resolution that recognizes that violence and calls on all states in the Americas to begin to institute programs and policies to address the violence. So what can we say about the levels of violence, or how would we characterize it? It's significant and increasing. The violence directed at LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender individuals tends to be more violent, more extreme than hate crime violence directed at many other communities. That's particularly true in terms of statistics we've been looking at here in the United States. The FBI at the national level in the U.S. is required to collect statistics on hate crime violence on a range of different grounds, on race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, and sexual orientation. And if you look at those statistics, many of the crimes directed at individuals on the basis of their sexual orientation are more violent than the crimes committed against some of the other groups. Now, that's not to diminish the level or severity of the other crimes. It's just to say that we have been starting to notice some extreme levels of violence against LGBT communities, and again, often sexualized violence. It's a real concern. So, and the other important point to remember is that while we're seeing an increase by all surveys and sort of community statistics, we still think that the levels of violence are vastly underreported. So we're seeing really concerning levels of violence, but we're seeing them, we think, still underreported. And we've also seen recently a real spike, a concerning level of violence directed at individuals who are transgender or transvestite, individuals who don't conform to gender stereotypes. And we're seeing, we think, a trend that the violence, and particularly the sexual violence, is being used to punish individuals who seem to be transgressing gender stereotypes. And that, again, is a real source of concern.